Good morning and welcome to our virtual broadcast here at First Unitarian Church of Toledo. I say here, but really, let me make sure we are outputting. There we are. Good morning. We are broadcasting virtually from our homes, but we look forward to seeing you in person next week. I just have a couple of brief announcements. Blanket making is Wednesday, January 26th in Fellowship Hall. The incorrect date was given in our Toledo Unitarians media, but please read about the blanket meeting and report to Fellowship Hall this coming Wednesday from 10:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. Remember, no skills are required. If it helps you to bring your own scissors, wear a mask, and social distancing will be practiced. As we begin our service this morning, I have these opening words. A Common Destiny by David H. Eaton, adapted. All living substance, all substance of energy, being, and purpose are united and share the same destiny. All people, those who we love and those we know not of, are united and share the same destiny. Birth to death, we share this unity with the sun, earth, our family, strangers, flowers in the field, snowflakes, volcanoes, and moonbeams. Birth, life, death, unknown, unknown, unknown. Our destiny from unknown to unknown. May we have the faith to accept this mystery and build upon its everlasting.
And I bring words by Marjorie Montgomery to light our chalice. She wrote, "Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift." And please join me in reciting our covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Our opening hymn is number 345, "With Joy We Claim the Growing Light," words written by Samuel Longfellow, and the music from a German musical handbook.
With freedom and true
Story time. In today's service, we'll be talking about death. For the story, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about a song that some people play to honor the dead. It's actually a military bugle call, and we know it as taps. Mickey, could you hum those notes? That's the beginning of it. You might hear taps played at a military funeral. Sometimes instead of taps, people might call it Butterfield's Lullaby, as a U.S. Army general in the Civil War named Daniel Butterfield arranged those 24 notes in July of 1862 the way we hear them today. In that same month, during the war, a corporal had died, and his captain wanted the corporal buried with full military honors. But instead of having a 21-gun salute, shots fired over the soldier's grave, the captain suggested taps be used, as that would mean no gunfire to confuse troops on either side. Taps became well known to the point that both Union and Confederate troops played it. Though taps is a bugle call with no lyrics, people have written words for the tune. One common lyric came from Horace Lorenzo Trim. Let's conclude story time by asking Mickey to sing the first verse as Trim wrote it.
Day is done, gone the sun, from the lake, from the hills, from the sky, all is well, safely rest, God is nigh. I'd love to share our centering music today. And this is actually a throwback from what I hoped to share with you last week. My tech skills have improved, and I would love to share the voices of our choir singing a piece that was commissioned for us last year. It's a lullaby between generations. Hush, hush, jajang, jajang.
Jajang, jajang, little child. Jajang, jajang, little child. Oh, hush your crows, dear rooster. Do not wake my little child.
Jajang, jajang, little child. Jajang, jajang, little child. Do not wake my little child. Sleep, sleep.
Jajang, jajang.
Do not
Join me for a time of meditation, contemplation, and prayer. Yesterday, Saturday, was the 49th anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision in Roe v. Wade, which made abortion safe and legal in the United States. At one time, we thought it was settled law of the land, but with changes in court membership, it's under a very real threat right now of no longer being the controlling precedent. So we Unitarian Universalists who generally believe in a woman's right to choose and keeping the concept of safe and legal abortions possible, have that on our minds very much. Also Friday, the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh died. There are members of our congregation who are also members of circles in which Thich Nhat Hanh was a founder. And we think especially of them, but of all of us, because his loss is a loss to humanity. Fortunately, his Sangha, his teachings, continue along with the Buddha's. I will point out that we had a service centered on Thich Nhat Hanh. If I remember the date, it was October 18th, 2020, and that is on our YouTube channel. And you're welcome later, after this service is over, to go and see that again, because it has readings written by Thich Nhat Hanh and a sermon focused on him and his work. Our words for meditation, contemplation, and prayer today are written by Helen Lutton Cohen. Living brings us closer to dying. Each moment of our living brings us closer to dying. Young or old, the knowledge of life's end is with us, growing more real, more familiar through the experiences of time and of loss. Yet, what is to keep us from frittering away what time is left to us, making it almost a matter of indifference that we have passed this way? How are we to grasp the urgency of life, to know and seize the moment that will lift us out of mere survival into that realm where someone after us will say, "She truly lived"? Either path will do, sudden or almost imperceptible. They will lead us beyond self-preoccupation and protection to the safe ground of understanding and acceptance. We will come to know within ourselves the satisfaction and peace of having lived with consciousness and purpose. We will know the joy of having given ourselves to life. Amen. Let us observe 1 minute of silence, followed by Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in thy heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Thank you for those who let me know that that was not audible. I'm going to go ahead and start that reading again just so we can hear. Awesome. Because it's just so beautiful. This is Those Who Live Again by George Eliot. Oh, may I join the choir invisible of those immortal dead who live again in minds made better by their presence. Live in pulses stirred to generosity, in deeds of daring rectitude, in scorn of miserable aims that end with self. In thoughts sublime that pierce the night like stars, and with their mild persistence urge our search to vaster issues. So to live is heaven, to make undying music in the world, breathing a beauteous order that controls with growing sway the growing life of humanity. That better self shall live till human time folds its eyelids, and the human sky be gathered like a scroll within the tomb. This is life to come, which martyred souls have made more glorious for us who strive to follow. May I reach that purest heaven, be to other souls the cup of strength in some great agony, enkindle generous ardor, feed pure love, beget the smiles that have no cruelty, be the sweet presence of a good diffused, and in diffusion ever more intense. So shall I join the choir invisible, whose music is the gladness of the world.
to thank all of you viewers for hanging in with us while we get past little technical challenges. We are still having church, even though it is from Mickey's and my homes, and we did not cancel because of weather, even though the path from bedroom to living room might have been a bit treacherous today. That's one thing about working from home. Anyway, we're glad that you're with us this morning. We're almost 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic. In the United States, more than 70 million cases have been reported, and we're nearing 865,000 deaths. Worldwide, it's close to 350 million cases, and there are more than 5.5 million deaths. In my own house this past week, there were 2 cases of COVID, my wife, Jewel, and myself. And for us, thanks to our each having 3 vaccination shots, we had what felt like bad colds and were not at risk of death or even hospitalization. We're now improving, and according to the health department, we can now be in circulation again, masked, although I'm not going to the office immediately. To prepare for today's service, I chose to change the topic and rework some earlier writing rather than start a new sermon from scratch. And the topic, Stories of Life and Death, is a little bit closer to some of our thoughts or observations during the pandemic. Some of us have genuine grief and bereavement for recent losses near to us, some from COVID-19, others from other causes. For parents or children or siblings we've lost from this world, and for our chosen loved ones. There's a more general and collective sadness for other deaths, like that on Friday of Thich Nhat Hanh, a spiritual leader to some in this congregation, including those in Flowing Water Sangha. And we might mourn celebrities who in some way spoke to us, and we feel for friends of friends or of members of our community we didn't know ourselves who died early or too soon or otherwise in an unnatural way, like by accident or at another's hand. In Carl Seeberg's Great Occasions, a collection of readings for different life transitions rituals, Seeberg writes, "What can be said of death, except that nothing can be said? After 10,000 years of death, we do not talk about it, we weep. But of our dead, of them we have much to say. It would be mean and contemptible to cast them into the ground or the fire without a backward glance, as if they were only some leaf falling off an autumn tree." End quote. When these grievous deaths of our own people happen, we have a bareness like leafless trees. But those autumn leaves don't just fall off the tree. They lived and thrived and changed. And humans live and thrive and change. It can take more than a winter for us to have the time and healing to return to our fuller selves. We have our own times of barrenness, but over time, most of us spring back. As we see the natural seasonal changes in the earth, we can come to an awareness that people also follow nature's laws, including the ones of demise, and that our vitality and health will end up being ash and dust. Death, while we know of life ending, continues to be unknowable to us in many ways. But we do know life, or at least some of it, and in life we make stories to comprehend death and to keep the dead with us. Many probably most of us have hopes that, though the body decays, the mind somehow is tied to the soul, and that there is such a thing as a soul, and we will continue after human death in some way. There could be an afterlife, or dead can be dead with no soulful transcendence. We don't have scientific provable evidence of an other side. But we can continue with an earthly presence after we die by having our names and stories continue being said and told by the ones we love, by our descendants, by the people we affected when our presence on earth made a difference. And through stories about us, our loved ones move forward. David R. Loy wrote in The World is Made of Stories, "The world is made of our accounts of it because we never grasp the world as it is in itself, apart from stories about it. We do not experience a world and then make up stories to understand it. Whenever we try to peel them all away, to discover the reality behind, whatever becomes exposed immediately transforms into story, like excavated artifacts that disintegrate as soon as uncovered." Ursula K. Le Guin said, "Stories are what death thinks he puts an end to. He can't understand that they end in him, but they don't end with him." Today, I'm talking about stories of life and death. It might be helpful to say that I love stories. Today, I'm asking you to think about your own stories, and perhaps at the Zoom coffee hour after the service, you can share your stories. A wonderful thing about stories is most of us tell them differently, even if we've had the same experience. So as you listen to my thoughts, or if heaven forbid, I lose your attention and you start daydreaming, think about your stories of life and death, and consider sharing them to help us all get a better picture of how stories center us in our mortal lives. It's been a while since I talked about my concept of story theology. That's my thought that, much like that David Loy quote of the world being made of our accounts of it, I see religion as being made from stories. Of course, there are the stories of sacred text, scripture, but those came about in part because people were trying to make sense of the world. If you're out in the middle of nowhere and nature brings on a serious event, tornado, earthquake, drought, for example, you might attribute it to the actions of a supreme being, and you fashion a story about why that devastation is threatened. Religion is also the story of institutions and religious leaders, of the faith itself, its history, which often is largely enhanced with symbolism and not actual history. And religion is the stories we tell one another, not just of how we fit into the spiritual world we recognize, such as a Christian's salvation story, but also of how we live our daily lives and express our character. For most of us, stories didn't end at some time in the past. There are folks who say it all ends with revelation and anything non-biblical is to be resisted. They're ongoing, and we seek out new stories. All of these religious stories have much to do with our comprehending, if not necessarily understanding, life and death. Religion and stories that we make, read, and are told relate to our immediate experiences, to larger stories of life, death, and the awareness of our limited time on earth. To get you to see the importance of stories, if you don't already, I point to three aspects. There is the was of the life story, what you might read in an obituary, and the stories you're told about the departed. The is of stories for today's talk comes from what we hear in the memorial service or funeral. The eulogy or the memories of mourners who speak in remembrance give something very much relating the dead to the present. Stories that range from, "I can't believe she's gone when we were just doing volunteer work together last week," to "we were lifelong friends, and let me tell you a little bit about a secret he carried to his grave, but I don't have to carry that." There's an immediacy there. Even an obituary has a different character when it's spoken at a funeral rather than when you read it online. And the will-be of addressing life on earth after a loved one's death is a way kind of continuing their story, whether it's living in the memory, using the lost loved one as inspiration, or maybe even doing your own thing with the hope that your late companion would be proud of your action. The was of the life story. When I was a journalist, I wrote a few obituaries. And as a minister, sometimes I'm the one to give a eulogy. Obituaries are one of the givens of a daily newspaper. I remember some comedian's observation that an indication of a person's age is when the obituaries become the first thing the person reads in the paper. Sometimes it might be fun to write about obituaries, maybe make note of the more bizarre ones. They've changed character significantly because today staff-written obituaries have become rare, and most obituaries come from the family or the funeral home, and someone pays for the obituary to be published. Most of those follow a template, just listing standard information. But sometimes an offbeat obituary gets turned in that's character revealing. We might learn about alcoholics who are no longer anonymous, benefactors whose names were revealed only at their deaths, or people with a healthy sense of humor. And we can be urged to be aware, like the obituary of John Christensen, Melanie's husband, which began with a call for the reader to have a colonoscopy. The was is important as a goodbye. It's also important as a record identifying the person for the future, as you can see in some of the genealogy tracing TV shows. What was the person like is what a good obituary tells. This is who the person was, not just a listing of birth and death, occupation and survivors. The is of the memorial. The memorial service, funeral, or commitment ceremonies I like are the ones that mourn the death by celebrating the life. That can't always happen, but I hope the opportunity is there. Both religious and secular services at times seem to forget the person and depend instead on ritual or reminding those gathered that they might change their ways if they want the possibility of a heaven, whatever that heaven might be. Those services that forget are sometimes held at the expense of a good memory. I'm in agreement with those who say that the funeral is for the living. I think that means that the mourners are the ones who might need the ritual of the formal farewell. Don't use the deceased as an example of religious conversion or questionable piety. That seems to stick on the was, not the is. The essay Social Uses of Funeral Rites by David G. Mandelbaum in a 1959 book titled The Meaning of Death says, rites performed for the dead generally have important effects for the living. A funeral ceremony is personal in its focus and is societal in its consequences. For the is, I've found, the stories give continuing memorial to the departed, keeping the person in society as long as the memory is with the living. The eulogy is one story, but when attendees also speak, reminisce, that continues the life, the character, the special qualities. The eulogy doesn't just say what the person did, which is more the formal obituary in my thinking. The eulogy says why the person mattered, and still does. If the person didn't, there wouldn't be mourners in attendance. An honest one gives an honest appraisal. Nobody's all good, and none of us is good all the time. But bad is one thing, damage to others another. If the person hurt others and wasn't forgiven, or didn't make amends, recognize that in some way. That's also part of being human. I've considered it a privilege. I've considered it a privilege to sit with family members, making funeral plans, and hear stories about their loved one. Yes, I can get the obituary type information easily, but for the eulogy, it's the stories that make the service a celebration. The examples of a life well lived are good. The yarns of humor or being a fish out of water might reveal character. The tales of achievement or great love might make me wish I knew the person when she or he was alive. And I, as a minister, am brought into their circle to a degree, which helps to make the ceremony good. For the is stories, the person's remains might be present in casket or urn, but the spirit generated by those assembled is the better presence of the person. That spirit is the essential connection to those who survive. The will-be of addressing life on earth after a loved one's death. In most of the memorial services that I've been the minister for, I've said words like these. We come here today to celebrate the life, mourn the death, and be together in our grief over the loss of this person with love, tenderness, and reverence. Memory is what guides us today, remembering the life that they lived and being mindful to keep them in our thoughts in the days ahead. For by thinking of them, we keep them with us and continue their presence with us. One part of the will-be of addressing life on earth after a loved one's death is making a place for the loved one. The other aspect of will-be is those who mourn. Grief and bereavement can be immeasurable. You know there's no set period and then you're over it. Some people's grief is so internal that they can't talk about their loved one. Others won't be quiet. I guess there can be too much of stories. Sometimes supporters might keep stories of the dead in their own minds and be sensitive about sharing. With that in mind, I advocate that stories be shared as much as possible, but be aware of when that possibility might not be right. When I was a hospital chaplain with families experiencing a loved one's death, I asked them to tell me stories, and I asked that they continue to tell stories about the loved one. But sometimes the best practice was not to ask or not to pursue an answer. Sitting in silence builds a new story in a way, and that can be great support. Death time is also story time. Keep the dead in memory, but get new stories too. Gather together and share. What stories about death, about the dead, might you share to help others see the importance of story to the living and to keep the person who passed with you, with us? Tell. So be it.
Thank you so much. We come to this time of offering, and I want to invite you all, if you have not had a chance, to click on the link in the YouTube description box. You can find uutoledo.org. There are many ways to get involved and to give. If you prefer the old-fashioned way, you can always find us at 3205 Glendale Avenue.
Now for our coming soon. Next Sunday's Spiritual Adventure Forum, 9:45 a.m. on Sunday, January 30th, will be on fostering and adopting animals, presented by Luann Bilstein. And be prepared, I say, as somebody who has had 3 animals come into our house as fosters and then adoptees. And then at 11 a.m. on Sunday, which is planned to be both on the Toledo Unitarians YouTube channel and in person, but do keep an eye on social media about this, just because, as we have done the past 2 weeks, COVID has entered the picture, and also today weather has entered the picture. So always be aware during the winter that a planned in-person service might end up being remote only. So do watch social media. But next week's topic is Pastoral Anniversary. Can you believe that on February 1st is the 5th anniversary of my being the called full-time settled minister at First Unitarian Church of Toledo?
We invite you immediately after today's service to join us on Zoom for coffee hour, and that information is in the YouTube description box and will be on the screen. So we hope you see us. If you hear any meowing, that is my foster failure who would like to help me with these closing words appropriately. Let Me Die Laughing by Mark Morrison Reed. We are all dying, our lives always moving toward completion. We need to learn to live with death and to understand that death is not the worst of all events. We need to fear not death, but life, empty lives, loveless lives, lives that do not build upon the gifts that each of us has been given. Lives that are like living deaths. Lives which we never take the time to savor and appreciate. Lives in which we never pause to breathe deeply. What we need to fear is not death, but squandering the lives we have been miraculously given. So let me die laughing, savoring one of life's crazy moments. Let me die holding the hand of one I love and recalling that I tried to love and was loved in return. Let me die remembering that life has been good and that I did what I could. But today, just remind me that I am dying so that I can live, savor, and love with all my heart.
As we send the flame today, at a time when we've been paying attention to death, let's let the extinguished flame not be another symbol of ending, but that we also change when we encounter the world before us.
Just as long as I have breath, I must answer
dreams and in my dark, always that elusive spark. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to truth. Just as long as my heart beats, I must answer yes to love. Disappointment pierced